Hello, everyone. I hope that you can hear me and see me. My name is Ushia Kanai. I'm one of the admissions counselor at the Geneva School of Diplomacy and International Relations. Thank you very much for your time today. And I'm going to do the presentation for this webinar. First of all, I would like to tell you more or less the structure of this webinar for today. And we are going to have the Dr. Professor Zayas doing the lecture. And then we will have a small Q&A session. And at the end, if you have any other questions and concerns about the institution, we will have then 5 minutes also to collect emails if you want to contact us more directly. So, and we will give another 1 minute to the rest of you to connect. If you want, please, you can write in the chat where you're from. And we know that we have people from all over the world, which is amazing as always. And please keep yourself always in mute. Then during the Q&A session, I will be the one to conduct it and moderating. We will try to answer as many questions as possible, of course. And yes, so ready to zero. Okay, perfect. So I think that I'm going to start doing the presentation right now. So today we have a webinar that is titled Navigating the Present, the Vital Role of International Law in Today's Global Landscape. And we are really, really grateful and really happy to have today our Professor Alfred de Zayas. He's a distinguished professor at the Geneva School of Diplomacy, and he's a former UN independent expert on the promotion of a democratic and equitable international order. He has decades of experience and expertise, and he has made a significant contributions on the field of international law. So without any further ado, I would like to present the Professor de Zayas. So the floor is yours, Professor. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending where you are in the world. As the case may be, I've been a teacher here at GSD for the last 19 years. Before that, I was teaching at the university in Chicago, at the university in Vancouver, in Trier in Germany, in Galway, in Ireland, in Alcalá de Henares in Spain. And for 25 years, I was a senior lawyer with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Now, the secret of learning is actually to enjoy yourselves. The secret of GSD, and that's what I want to tell you, we want to teach students to learn by themselves. You should think by yourselves. You should follow the example, or rather the maxim of the great Roman poet Horatius 2,000 years ago, who said, sapere aude. That's an imperative, which means live by your own wits. You know, don't engage in groupthink. Don't bother just simply to follow others. Have the courage of your convictions. Have the courage to proactively go out there and get the information and make your own minds. Now, I was going to speak freely, but since I only have 35 minutes and I do want you to have a text, I said, why not just write a text? And then I'll send you the text so that you can have it in writing electronically. And I will be navigating, as the title of the speech indicates, and I will try to bring you up to speed with developments at the United Nations and at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Barely a month ago, I spoke before the Security Council of the United Nations. It was on an issue of terrorism and an issue of sanctions and unilateral coercive measures. More about that later. But more actual, yesterday in room 27 of the Palais des Nations, I spoke in a panel commemorating what you probably don't know exists. We have so many international days. Yesterday, 24 of April, was International Day for Multilateralism and Diplomacy for Peace. Now, here, GSD is a school of diplomacy, and that is what we support. Now, I stressed that the UN Charter is akin to a world constitution, the only rules-based international order that is universally recognized, notwithstanding the fact that some powerful states systematically ignore it. The most urgent task of the United Nations, without a doubt, is to facilitate ceasefires and peace negotiations in a spirit of compromise. Secretary General Antonio Guterres and High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk agree that, of course, prevention is better than cure, and that it is crucial to break the vicious circle of crime and reprisal and to devise means of coexistence and reconciliation. Unless we stumble into World War III, as our ancestors stumbled into World Wars I and II, there will be some kind of post-war period in Ukraine, Israel, Sudan, Congo, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Niger, the Sahel, Syria, Yemen, and other countries at war. We must prepare for this post-war period, remembering the words of the Constitution of UNESCO that since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. In this context, let me recall General Assembly Resolution 73/127, adopted on 12 December 2018 by a recorded vote of 144 in favor, 2 against, and no abstentions. This resolution, submitted by the non-aligned movement, declared 24 April International Day for Multilateralism and Diplomacy for Peace. In its preambular paragraph, the resolution reaffirms the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, in particular, the obligation to settle disputes through peaceful means and the determination to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. What is multilateralism? Simply put, cooperation among multiple players on the basis of sovereign equality. It entails adherence to a common political project based on the respect of shared system of norms and values. Multilateralism is based on founding principles such as consultation, inclusion, and solidarity. It requires goodwill, good faith, and a commitment to respect and enforce legal rules. When legal rules are violated with impunity, when judgments and rulings of the International Court of Justice are ignored, when Security Council and General Assembly resolutions are not implemented, the whole system suffers. There's too much lip service for the concept of the rule of law. People always talk about the rule of law, but it's being undermined domestically and internationally. Global problems require global solutions, which cannot be imposed by one country, but must be negotiated. We urgently need solutions for climate, food, energy, financial problems. We must be ready to address pandemics and natural disasters, including an asteroid impacting on Earth. And of course, there are studies about that. NASA and many other observers have been for decades now looking at the firmament and saying, when are we going to be hit by one of those big stones? Diplomacy must contribute to the advancement of this cooperation in all fields, whether it be in the field of physics, medicine, or education. Now, a few words about the Geneva School of Diplomacy, the most noble vocation of every academic institution is to teach its students how to think critically and independently, how to ask questions, how to conduct research, how to identify obstacles and reject fake narratives and scams. I always tell my students, I quoted already to you Horace's Sapere Aude. I also quote to them another quote from Horatius, docendo decimus. That's something that I actually feel and experience. We learn by teaching, and we teachers learn from students. Students are so spontaneous and sometimes so fresh in their ideas that we actually benefit from this exchange. Ultimately, the purpose of education is to complete and develop our personalities, to help us learn how to live in harmony with nature and with ourselves, in solidarity with the rest of humanity, how to craft a system that will allow mutually beneficial relations with all peoples and nations. For thousands of years, humanity has been trying to establish a world order that will promote prosperity for all and advance human rights based on a realization that we are all children of the same God and that we all have to coexist in this single planet of ours. We do not own nature. We are part of it. We have a duty to improve the planet, not just to preserve it. We should pass it on to future generations better than we received it in trust from our ancestors. In order to live in peace and harmony, we need law. The United Nations Charter is our constitution. It can be improved, can be amended to respond to today's needs, which are not necessarily those of 1945. Mutual cooperation rather than confrontation is a win-win situation, but there are psychological impediments to the implementation of treaties and the enforcement of judicial decisions. On the positive side, we must acknowledge that the United Nations and its many agencies, including the International Labor Office, the World Health Organization, and the World Meteorological Organization, have woven an immense fabric of conventions, laws, and regulations in all fields of human activity concerning health, labor, environment. Judicial institutions like the International Court of Justice have facilitated the adjudication of contentious cases and have clarified the law in advisory opinions. Undoubtedly, we have made considerable progress since 1944. I am not a pessimist, and I'm not one of those who says, oh my God, it's so much worse than before. I'm not going to give you the o tempora o mores of Cicero and saying, oh my God, the times today, and say it was always better before. It was not. And we have made progress, and we should continue making progress, but we have to weed out the problems and be aware of the dangers ahead of us. The United Nations has a track record of standard setting, which is amazing. Also, our monitoring mechanisms are good, but of course, laws are not self-executing. Law is not mathematics, and enforcement is lacking. Why? There are many reasons. Because states fail to live up to their legal obligations. This implementation gap detracts from the authority of the legal structures themselves and detracts, obviously, from the United Nations. The evolution from unipolarity to multipolarity. Global governance and peace depend on the enforcement of agreed legal norms. Implementation functions on the basis of the principles of multilateralism, the sovereign equality of states, the prohibition of the use of force, the prohibition of interference in the affairs of other states, and the practical necessity of mutual cooperation to address global challenges. Over the past 30 years, we have witnessed how the unipolar world led by the United States has evolved into a multipolar world with China, India, Indonesia, Russia, South Africa, Brazil, Turkey playing increasingly important roles. Nevertheless, significant risks for the peace and security of mankind do persist because the transition to multipolarity is encountering, shall we say, pushback, from those countries that today exercise the greatest power over trade and finances. Thus, the United Nations is needed more than ever to facilitate the transition through a confidence-building program and through negotiation. A new security architecture must be crafted and agreed upon not only for Europe, but for the entire world. New intergovernmental organizations like BRICS, with its 10 current members and a queue of dozens seeking membership, are changing the geopolitical landscape. Meanwhile, new development strategies like the Belt and Road Initiative augur well for peace through economic interdependence. Models of governance. The existing world order displays many models of governance, from monarchies to oligarchies to dictatorships to various manifestations of representative, participatory, and direct democracy. General Assembly Resolution 60/1 of 24 October 2005 recognizes in paragraph 135, I quote, "We reaffirm that democracy is a universal value based on the freely expressed will of people to determine their own political, economic, social, and cultural systems and their full participation in all aspects of their lives. We also reaffirm that while democracies share common features, there's no single model of democracy, that it does not belong to any one country or region, and reaffirm the necessity of due respect for sovereignty and the right of self-determination of peoples. We stress that democracy, development, and respect for all human rights and fundamental freedoms are interdependent and mutually reinforcing," end of quote. The US has already hosted 3 so-called democracy summits, unfortunately marred by the exclusion of many countries and an atmosphere of confrontation. The 3rd summit was held now in Seoul, Republic of Korea, on 18 to 20 March 2024, under the banner Democracy for Future Generations. Almost all at the same time, Beijing hosted a 3rd Democracy Forum, which offered other perspectives. An obstacle to respectful and efficient multilateralism is the obsolete binary approach of the world, which tends to divide cultures and civilizations into democracies and autocracies. More and more, the Western democracies take a moralistic approach to democracy and human rights and pretend to possess all the answers. However, when they use the word democracy, they essentially mean capitalism, an ideological construct that has nothing to do with the actual meaning of democracy, demos, and kratos, ruled by the people. Or as Abraham Lincoln so nicely put it in his 1863 Gettysburg Address, government of the people, by the people, and for the people. In my book, Building a Just World Order, this is the first in a trilogy of human rights, followed in 2022 by Countering Mainstream Narratives, followed last year, 23, by the human rights industry, all 3 of them in United Nations Blue, and published by Clarity Press in Atlanta, Georgia. In this first book, Building a Just World Order, I go into the theory and practice of democracy and formulate 25 principles of international order, which would best function if there were genuine democracies, where everyone was informed and consulted, where the right to access information was ensured. Democracies become dysfunctional when the population is subjected to relentless indoctrination, where dissenters are intimidated, persecuted, prosecuted for their opinions, where the administration of justice is effectively hijacked for what we call lawfare against dissenters and whistleblowers like Julian Assange. I personally interviewed Julian Assange for 3 hours in London, and my friend and colleague, Professor Niels Meltzer, currently the chief lawyer for the International Committee of the Red Cross. Here's Niels Meltzer. He was UN rapporteur on torture. he also visited Julian Assange and wrote a very important book about it. Talking about whistleblowers, here's another book that I highly recommend to you. This is Edward Snowden's book, Permanent Record. By the way, the man has an incredible sense of humor. I really enjoyed reading it because of that. Another book that I want to recommend to you is Jeffrey Sachs' The Price of Civilization. Now, Jeffrey Sachs, as you know, was and is the foremost expert in the Sustainable Development Goals. And he's been the head of Columbia University's department on the Sustainable Development Goals, and has been the advisor of three Secretary Generals of the United Nations, beginning with Kofi Annan, then with Ban Ki-moon, and now with Antonio Guterres. He's written a dozen books, and also The End of Poverty, very important book. Unlike the fantasies of another author called Francis Fukuyama, The End of History and the Last Man. This book, I remember reading it some 20 odd years ago and just laughing at it, because this is so immature. This is so infantile what the man is writing. But he fits into the paradigm that we know from Noam Chomsky and his manufacturing consent. So having said that, I should move on to other issues like international cooperation and solidarity, and remind you that the key principle of international order is multilateralism, which entails cooperation on the basis of the UN Charter. And I can start by recalling the commitment of all states under Articles 55 of the UN Charter, with a view to the creation of conditions of stability and well-being, which are necessary for peaceful and friendly relations among nations, based on respect for the principles of equal rights and self-determination of peoples. The United Nations shall promote peace. That is the essence of the United Nations. Now, having said that, since time is running, let me see, I only have about 7-8 more minutes. And we have so many problems in the world. I also personally met on several occasions President Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter had only 4 years presidency from 1977 to 1980. But then he created the Carter Center, and in the following 50 years, he did magnificent work for human rights, for international law. And I've been invited to the Carter Center, where I met him and participated on panels with him. He was still, back in 2015, extremely sharp. He actually moderated one of the panels in which I spoke. And he is a practicing Christian. And he wrote a book back in 2009, which I liked a great deal. We Can Have Peace in the Holy Land. And he wrote another book called, as I said, Palestine Peace, Not Apartheid. This is something that cost the Carter Center a lot of money in donations when Carter dared to call shall we say, the separation wall in Israel, an apartheid wall, et cetera, et cetera. But unfortunately, it is an apartheid wall. And I must say, nothing would I want more than peace for the Palestinians and peace for the Israelis. But for that, you need really good faith, goodwill. You have to stick to agreements. You cannot have the culture of cheating, which we have witnessed over the last 70 years here. I mean, the war in Gaza did not start on the 7th of October 2023. I mean, the war started back in 1914, 47, 48, with the Nakba, with the expulsion of nearly 1 million Palestinians from their homes, and the relentless expansion of colonial settlers into Palestine. United Nations has issued literally hundreds of resolutions, including Resolution 242 of the Security Council concerning the occupied territories, et cetera, and there's been no progress. Also, the International Court of Justice issued back in 2004 an advisory opinion delineating all the violations of international law, of international treaties, and what to do. The advisory opinion has been totally ignored. And now there are several cases before the International Court of Justice, the case on genocide presented by South Africa and joined by Colombia and a number of other states, the case presented by Nicaragua against Germany for complicity. Also, there's a pending case, an advisory opinion on the rights of the Palestinians in the occupied territory. So at least the highest judicial instance of the United Nations is seized of the matter, and they are judging what is actually in violation of the UN Charter, in violation of the Geneva Conventions of 1949 and the 1977 additional protocols, et cetera, et cetera. I think that law is our only way of solving matters. I don't think that unless we all agree that we need an international order based on rules that will be observed by everybody. I mean, no one gets a free ticket. And you simply have to observe a ruling of the International Court of Justice, and you have to observe a resolution adopted by the Security Council or by the General Assembly. Now, going on with regard to my principles of international order, as UN rapporteur, back in 2018, I formulated 25 principles of international order. And it was my seventh thematic report to the Human Rights Council presented in March 2018 that formulated these principles. And then I published them as chapter 2 in this book, Building a Just World Order. It is not discovering the Mediterranean. It's not unprecedented, my 25 principles. They're very solidly anchored on the UN Charter and resolutions 2131, 2625, 3314, 3911, 552, 61, etc. Of the General Assembly. It is based on UN conventions, including the United Nations Convention, the Vienna Convention on diplomatic relations, the Vienna Convention on the law of treaties, et cetera, et cetera. Now, mentioning the relevance of the Vienna Convention on diplomatic relations, as you may be aware, a couple of weeks ago, Jorge Glass, with whom I've had a lot of contact also, Jorge Glass was the vice president of Ecuador during the government of Rafael Correa, 10 years. And he stayed in Ecuador when the new government came into power. And that was a mistake because in many countries in Latin America, lawfare is the order of the day. And if you are on the opposition, then law is being used, to neutralize you. Or rather, law is being misused for political purposes. And they accused him of corruption, et cetera, et cetera. It was very easily done, huh? And then he fled into the embassy of Mexico in Quito, Ecuador, and the president of Ecuador did something absolutely amazing. It's totally unprecedented that you would send your police and army to simply break into a diplomatic mission and kidnap a person who has diplomatic asylum. You know, this violates so many treaties. It violates the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. It violates the Latin American Convention of 1954 on diplomatic relations, diplomatic asylum, violates the Treaty of Amity between Mexico and Ecuador. Now the thing is before the International Court of Justice, a contentious case, which no doubt will end up with a finding that Ecuador violated all of these treaties. And it is important. But most important for everybody is the concept of peace. And in my 25 principles of international order, the paramount principle is, of course, peace. And the preamble and Articles 1 and 2 of the Charter stipulate that the principal goal of the organization is the promotion and maintenance of peace. This entails the prevention. Again, it's so important for you to understand prevention is better than cure. So the function of the United Nations should be to prevent conflict. And in order to prevent conflict, you have to listen to all sides. There's a legal rule going back to Roman law, audiatur et altera pars. You always have to listen to all sides. And that unfortunately does not always happen. And that leads then to conflict. And considering that I have very little time to go, I'm going to close by referring to the work of some of the United Nations agencies that have adopted so many conventions and so many rules to make human rights possible. Now, the motto of the International Labor Organization is Si vis pacem, colle justitiam. If you want peace, cultivate justice. And what is meant is cultivate social justice. You may be familiar with the expression si vis pacem para bello. If you want peace, prepare for war. I think that is absolute nonsense. I mean, what you this goes back to a mentality or to a logic of war and conflict rather than a rational approach to international relations, which is, look, you know, my neighbor doesn't necessarily have to be my friend. I don't have to love him, but I don't have to hate him either. And we should look for ways how to, on the basis of equality and on the basis of agreed norms, how you can have a modus vivendi, how you can live together in harmony. And that is what the United Nations is intending to do. Allow me to end my oral presentation now, since I am keen to hear your comments and questions. As UN independent expert on international order, I advocated the adoption of a global compact on education, a new treaty, an agreement that would channel our energies toward cooperation instead of confrontation. More than anything else, we need education for peace, education for multilateralism, education for empathy, a new humanistic approach to global problems. We need to rediscover the spirituality of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We have to rediscover the spirituality of Eleanor Roosevelt and René Cassin and Charles Malik and P.C. Chang and John Humphrey and all of the greats of 1948 who contributed in adopting this amazing document, this Magna Carta for humanity. And we have to see how, with good faith and goodwill, we can implement it. And let me end with yet another Latin quote. I had the benefit of having Latin and Greek when I was a young man, and I still love Latin. And the Peace of Westphalia of 1648, after the 30 Years' War, 8 million dead in Europe, wiped out about a third of the population of Germany. It was a horrible war from 1618 to 1648. Well, what was their motto? Pax optima rerum. Peace is the highest good. And that is what I want you all to understand and work for. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Now, the next part of this webinar, it will be the Q&A. So please, you can raise your hand, you can write your questions on the messages, exactly, if you prefer, how you prefer. Please keep it as brief as possible, because we will try to answer as many questions as possible. Also, if we are not able to do it, feel free to write us. At the end of the webinar, I will give you some contacts. So I will start right now. The first person that I will try to start with, the ones that raise your hand. The first person was Jack. So please, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. Hello, sir. My question is about multilateral organizations and how they currently operate. So we all know that multilateral organizations are as the member countries, and they are as strong as the member countries give power to it, right? So in a world that is more or less moving towards a more isolationist and seemingly nationalist policy in the relations in the international space, how are multilateral organizations, international multilateral organizations for that matter, adapting to this dynamic shift in the global order?
Thank you.
Well, let me talk to you about the organization I know, which is the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, that I served in various capacities. I used to be a consultant. I was a senior lawyer for them for decades, and then I was an independent expert. Now, we have grown a great deal, and we have a secretariat made up of people, from different cultures, not only different nationalities, but also different perspectives, different approaches to law, different approaches. But the common denominator is that we're all committed to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and we're all committed to enforcement of human rights and human dignity. We're all human. All organizations are imperfect. What we need, of course, is an Office of Internal Oversight, which we do have, and a system of monitoring to ensure that the office remains professional, that the office remains impartial, that the office is not in the service of any one state or group of states. I addressed that issue in the third book in my human rights trilogy, the human rights industry. And why did I call it the human rights industry? Partly because more and more the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has been politicized. And more the donors determine the agenda of the office. That is a very bad development. The office must remain independent. The office must not choose its priorities according to the desires of those who pay for it. Because many human rights and many violations of human rights occur in places where the people are indigent, where the people cannot hire good lawyers, where the people don't even know that they can address themselves to the United Nations. And who's going to speak for these people? And it should not be that the rich countries tell the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, we want you to do reports on LGBT. We want you to do reports on gender equality, et cetera, et cetera. I think that the right to life is far more important. And I think that the necessity of solidarity among states is essential, so that let us first make sure that the existing human rights enshrined in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, let's make sure that those rights are being promoted and protected. And let us not, spend our very limited time and resources on ancillary issues. Okay, next question.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jack. The next question will be Benjamin. So please, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you. So, the main purpose of the United Nations is to promote and to maintain peace all over the world. It implies peaceful resolution of conflict between states. So, I would like to know, nowadays, international peace is threatened from different corners, including, for example, in Africa, there is an ongoing war in the Democratic Republic of Congo. But in addition, in the Middle East, between Iran and Israel, there is also a war. Between Ukraine and Russia, there is also an ongoing war. So I'd like to know, on the basis of this fact, can we assume that the United Nations has failed to fulfill its duty, its purpose of maintaining peace all over the world?
Thank you.
Good question, Benjamin. Obviously, the United Nations has been unable to maintain the peace as you and I and others would want it. The problem is, in part, the failure of the Security Council. We have 15 members of the Security Council, of whom 5 have a veto power, the permanent members. And you have seen how the United States again and again has put in a veto to prevent a ceasefire. Now, that is a misuse of the veto. And in my book, Building a Just World Order, I have a chapter in which I deal with the necessity of reforming the United Nations, which is not that easy. I mean, you can amend the charter pursuant to Article 108, but the amendment also has to be approved by these 5 permanent members. If there's a veto against the amendment does not go through. So if you want to take away the veto power, you have to phase it out gradually. You cannot do it overnight. So instead of requiring, or allowing that one single vote would frustrate a resolution, you could change it to 2 votes. And that already limits the use of the veto power. You could also limit those matters which can be vetoed. Right now, it is very open-ended. Procedural decisions do not require unanimity, but the moment that you can argue this is a matter of substance, this is not procedural, then you do need unanimity. So if you can define what is a matter of substance and you can limit those areas in which a veto can be used, that again would help. And another possibility, of course, is the naming and shaming aspect. If a country uses the veto power, it should be obliged to defend it before the General Assembly. It must coram publico go out and say, I am blocking this resolution because A, B, C, and D, before the world, before the General Assembly. But once again, it's not the United Nations as an organization that has failed, certainly not the fault of Antonio Guterres, that there's a war in Ukraine, or that there's a war in Gaza, or that there's a war in Congo. It is the failure of the Security Council to have prevented these clashes, and that could have been prevented. For Ukraine, you had the Minsk agreements. If the Minsk agreements had been respected, there would be no war. But the Minsk agreements were violated systematically. If the United Nations had conducted self-determination referenda in Crimea, in Lugansk, in Donetsk, etc., that would be different too. That means you would know what people want. And I don't think it is appropriate for us in the West or in Africa or in Latin America or in Asia to determine that Crimea belongs to Ukraine or that Crimea belongs to Russia. The only people who should be called to make that decision are the people who live there. I myself was the representative of the Secretary General for the elections in Ukraine back in 1994, 30 years ago. And I was there in March for the parliamentary elections, and evidently the office liked my report because they invited me again to monitor the elections for the president in June 1994. Now, I crisscrossed the country. I went to Crimea, I went to the east. It's no doubt that the vast majority of the populations of these areas are Russian and feel Russian. So I think that we have shortchanged international law. I think that we have not used the tools that we have, such as referenda, in order to prevent conflict, in order to, first of all, find out what the people want, and on the basis of that information, then try to negotiate, try to reach a compromise that will lead to a win-win situation for everybody. But when there is intransigence and when there is bad faith, and when agreements are not agreements are not respected, then you are risking that someone is going to overreact and is going to use force. Of course, force is prohibited in Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the UN Charter. That is hard law. That is jus cogens, the prohibition of the use of force. But unfortunately, if the Security Council does not adopt a resolution condemning it and does not take action against the country that has broken or violated Article 2, Paragraph 4, then we are in a quagmire. We're not getting out of it. So, as I said, first of all, you need a mindset that does not moralize and does not divide the world into the good guys and the bad guys. You need a mindset that says we're all in this together. And there's good in the bad, and there's bad in the good. And we'd better just simply reach a modus vivendi, because we cannot risk a war in times of nuclear weapons. I have here, if I find it, the famous speech of President John F. Kennedy before American University. That was on the 10th of June, 1963. So 5 months before he was assassinated. And Kennedy wrote, while defending our own vital interests, our own American vital interests, nuclear powers must avert those confrontations which bring an adversary to a choice of either a humiliating retreat or a nuclear war. To adopt that kind of course in the nuclear age would be evidence only of the bankruptcy of our own policy or of a collective death wish for the world, unquote. I mean, this is a speech that you can get in the internet. If you do www. John F. Kennedy address American University, you will immediately get it. It's a remarkably wise speech. And of course, Kennedy had the experience already during the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962 of finding himself exactly in this situation. The United States did not want to lose face. Khrushchev did not want to lose face. So what do? So you strike a deal, a quid pro quo. The Soviets take their missiles away from Cuba, but then the United States takes its missiles away from Turkey. Now, quid pro quo is not appeasement. Quid pro quo is not, shall we say, it's not shameful. Quite the contrary. Quid pro quo is recognizing reality. The other guy has some security interests. We have some security interests. So let us not escalate. Let us de-escalate. And that is the function of the United Nations. And I was a boy when 1962, Adlai Stevenson III had the opportunity of crossing swords with Valery Zorkin, the Russian ambassador. And out of this, shall we say, dialogue, this public debate that took place between the Soviet Union and the United States, we ended up with a viable solution whereby no one was humiliated. And that is important to keep in mind. So don't think that the goal is victory. The goal is winner takes all. The goal is to defeat the other guy. No, the goal is to stop the killing right now, to have a ceasefire right now, to sit down and to talk. Thanks. Next.
Thank you very much. We will try to do at least 2-3 questions more.
And I'll be shorter, promise.
It's completely fine. Thank you, Professor. So the next person on the list is Stephanie. So please, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine.
Thank you for the opportunity. I will try and keep this short. So the professor mentioned that laws are self-executing, and the failure of states to live up to legal obligations is what is affecting the world today and the new world order. And I would just like a commentary on the states of autonomous weapons and self-executing weapons that are created through artificial intelligence, whether fully or partially autonomous, and with most of them not requiring human conduct to be emitted. And given the principles under international humanitarian law on necessity, proportionality, and overall just the military objective. So, what is your stance in the world we live in today, and quoting the charter where we are supposed to save future generations from the scourges of war? And now the war is quite literally shifting beyond the human understanding and experience.
Well, as I said, a global compact on education would be helpful, huh? If we would teach people the benefits of multilateralism, we would teach people the benefits of living together, of harmony, and of seeking compromise rather than winning. But lethal autonomous weapon systems, otherwise known as laws, are ab initio already illegal, because international humanitarian law has two principles. The one principle is a principle of distinction between civilians and military, between civilian objects and military objectives. Now, an autonomous, artificial intelligence will not be able to distinguish between a civilian object and a military object. And so it already fails the first test of distinction. And the second principle of international humanitarian law is the principle of proportionality. One of the problems with indiscriminate weapons like nuclear weapons is that not only they fail to separate civilians from military, it's that they are disproportionate. Because remember, the atomic bombs thrown on Hiroshima and Nagasaki killed about 250,000 civilians. Now, this is completely disproportionate to the goal. And the same thing with regard to the war in Gaza. You could have argued that after the crimes committed by Hamas in Israel on the 7th of October, that Israel, in its response, should push back and, shall we say, carry out one military action to repulse this crime committed against them. But repulsing this one attack does not give you green light to commit genocide, does not give you green light to kill 35,000 people. And that is complete violation of the principle of proportionality. So, next question.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Professor. And I'm going to continue. What I'm going to do is I'm going to continue with the ones that raise their hand. And I will collect all the questions that are on the messages. So then maybe we can reply to them later. I apologize.
You send them to me. You send them to me.
Exactly, because we have a lot of questions.
And I will send you the text. I will sanitize my text and send it to you so that if anybody wants to have the text of my lecture, they can get it.
As well as the bibliography and the bibliography from Professor Zayas and the recording of the meeting. So the next person, if I'm not mistaken, I'm going to go for the ones that raise the hand. Please, Muhammad, if I pronounce your name properly, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Please, really brief if it's possible.
Assalamu alaikum. How are you, my friends?
Hi.
Hi.
How are you, sir? I'm from Pakistan. I'm Muslim, alhamdulillah. It's the current issue, Israel and Palestine, the question.
Don't know that I got your question. You know, I heard
Yes.
Christian.
Please.
I mean, there is, of course, a major human rights problem with the persecution of Christians in many Muslim countries. I am a practicing Catholic myself, and I don't like to see my Christian brothers in Africa or in Asia being killed by Muslims, the same as I don't like to see any Muslims being killed by Christians. So it's, I don't know whether that was your question, but I didn't quite acoustically hear what you wanted.
Yes, please
Okay.
repeat.
Sir, this current issue is the all world, the human, this Israel Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like Jews, Christian, or Muslim. You are the all world is all human.
Yes.
There were, I mean, the funniest thing, or rather, you know as I know,
Okay.
Christians, the Muslims, and the Jews all
Yes.
believe in one God. And
One
he's
God.
supposed to have created all of us. So we are all brothers and sisters. So
Yes, sir.
this business of a Muslim killing a Christian or a Christian killing a Muslim or a Jew killing a Muslim, this is nonsense. We're all brothers and sisters, and we can live in harmony together. It's just the fact that some politicians, unfortunately, are so taken up with their own egos and with their own narcissism that they sacrifice their people at the expense of the welfare of everybody else. So next, because we don't have much time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. The next person, I'm going to just mute because of the sound. The next person was Olajide. I'm so sorry if I pronounce your names wrong.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Please answer your question, or answer ask your question. Sorry.
Okay, thank you so much. Professor, I just wanted to ask, and thanks for a wonderful presentation, by the way. Concerning the issue of Israel-Palestinian conflict, I was going to ask about the spoilers, the issue of the spoilers who are making peaceful resolution not to be achievable. So how do you think we can address the issue of spoilers as regards the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
I'm
Thank you.
not sure that I understand what you mean by spoilers. I mean, spoilers, you also have war profiteers. I mean, the war profiteers, you count the military industrial complex, they're making billions at the expense of the wars in Gaza and the wars in Ukraine. But that is probably not what you mean. I don't know, as far as spoilers, would you mean that intervention of the United States and European states on behalf of Israel constitute being spoilers? I don't know exactly what you mean.
Exactly. What I wanted to say is that, for example, if there are peace agreements or peace treaty within the conflicting parties, there are certain individuals, be it politicians or be it someone that is an ally or a state that is an ally to another state, who is making that peaceful agreement to be difficult to achieve. So,
glad you brought the issue, because that allows me to address a larger problem, and that is the problem of the information war. Unfortunately, the mass media engages in hate mongering, fear mongering. They create caricatures of the enemy, and you're supposed to hate the enemy, and you are supposed to dehumanize the enemy, to demonize the enemy. And I'm afraid that there's a lot of this incitement to hatred by the mainstream media, instead of trying to calm people, instead of trying to rationally convince people that there must be a period after this conflict. There must be a period in which we can again live together. There must be reconciliation of some kind. Well, they're completely ignoring the post-war period, as if we're going to simply annihilate the enemy and then the enemy is no longer there. That's an illusion. I mean, the Palestinians are not going away. The Palestinians will be there. It's the same thing with the hostility toward Russia and toward China. I mean, we may not like them. We don't have to like them, but they're not going away. The same thing, in every war. Your enemy is not going to completely dissolve into nothingness. Your enemy will be there after the war. So how are you going to live with your enemy after the war? So try to avoid creating situations that make any kind of reconciliation even more difficult than it is. Remind me, I already mentioned the Peace of Westphalia of 1648. You know what is interesting? After 8 million Europeans died in that war, in which horrendous crimes were committed, in which whole villages were annihilated and burnt down, and women were raped. It's 8 million. Think of it in the 17th century, what that meant. Well, Article 2 of the Treaty of Münster and Article 2 of the Treaty of Osnabrück gave a complete amnesty, because they said, for 30 years we've been slaughtering each other. If we now decide to continue through war crimes trials to prosecute everybody, you'd have to prosecute an enormous number of people, and the hate would continue. So they, as painful as it sounds, they thought that in the circumstances, it's better just simply to turn the page and to have an act of oblivion, of total oblivion, as is formulated in Article 2 of the Treaty of Osnabrück and of the Treaty of Münster. Next.
This is going to be the last question. So if you have any other questions, please write it on the message, so that way we can reply it. So Ravid, you are the last person, so please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Oh, thank you so much. Hi, Professor. My name is Ravit. I'm from Sri Lanka. And I had a very pertinent question regarding, I think everyone brought this out essentially, like with regards to Palestine and Israel and the ceasefire. I'd like to know more about the UNSC Reso 2728 being enacted in the Security Council. How exactly do the US and other stakeholders claim that UNSC 2728 is non-legally binding? In addition, how exactly do UNSC
Which one you say is not legally binding? I mean,
yeah,
a Security Council resolution is by definition legally binding. I mean,
exactly.
it's laid down in Article 25 of the UN Charter that decisions and resolutions of the Security Council are legally binding. That's black letter law. So.
Exactly, Professor. So in that regard, it's just that a lot of individuals, such as Jake Sullivan and most politicians as a whole, would regard like how exactly it works with the UN Charter's Article 5, and they what essentially they're doing is that challenging these ideals, and essentially like they've used this challenge to continuously ignore the ceasefire. Like when you see the ideals of UNSC Reso 2728 and achieving ceasefire during Ramadan, understand the fact that obviously it wasn't achieved, and Israel didn't necessarily fully acknowledge this resolution. So how exactly does the legally binding aspect of it work, especially when none of it was followed and stakeholders such as the United States claimed it was non-legally binding?
Well, the claim is absurd in law. Forget it. But the larger issue, the larger problem, is that we have here a rebellion against international law. And unfortunately, the rebellion against international law is happening precisely from those countries from whom you would expect international law to be upheld. Meaning, this rebellion is coming from the United States, from Canada, from the United Kingdom, from France, from Germany. So the collective West has rebelled against the United Nations Charter and has rebelled against international law in general. And they are engaging in what I would call destruction of language. You know it from Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. You know it from George Orwell's 1984, that war is peace, ignorance is strength. We are expected to accept what is called cognitive dissonance. We're expected to hold in our brains two completely inconsistent and contradictory ideas and believe in both of them at the same time. So the American credo is that we are the good guys. The American credo is that we are the leaders in human rights and the leaders in international law. But when international law doesn't go our way, then we say we're still the leaders, but we don't recognize international law, and that's okay. I mean, it's an oxymoron. You can't do that. But if you indoctrinate people enough, if there's enough brainwashing by the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN, then, you know, the masses, they're not lawyers like I am. They will accept it. And then there's this tremendous, shall we say, tendency of people to groupthink. If everybody is saying something, well, they might as well go along because it's safer to swim with the stream than against the stream. So I think that Jack Sullivan, Victoria Nuland, Anthony Blinken have been doing international law a grave disservice. And this is a much larger question of the breakdown of the rule of law domestically and internationally, the breakdown of a commitment to truth. People are now speaking of post-truth, as if truth was not objective. That is, truth is something that you can define to suit your geopolitical needs. Well, you can't do that. And what I see in the world is a shift from the unipolar world under the United States to a multipolar world in which not only China, but also India and Indonesia and South Africa and Nigeria and Kenya and Mexico and Brazil are playing greater roles. So we still have a world constitution in the form of the UN Charter. We still have it. So we still have a rules-based international order. What is important is that everybody agree that that's the only international order we have. And if we don't want to end up with Armageddon, we don't want to end up in an apocalypse, we'd better observe the prohibition of the use of force. We'd better sit down, talk with each other, and use the tools of diplomacy. That is what GSD is there to teach their students. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you
very
so much,
much,
Professor.
Professor. It was fantastic. It's always a pleasure to hear you. It's always a pleasure to have you. So thank you very much, all of you, for being here. The last part of this webinar is just to let you know that we will try to answer all your questions. Also, to let you know that, of course, you will get the recording of this webinar. You will get a small bibliography that Professor Zayas gave it to us, that the one also that provide to our students. And also, because right now we are in the application process, not only for bachelor, but our masters, we offer information sessions. And I think that these information sessions with our admissions counselors can help you a lot in order to assess what are your goals, academic goals, and professional goals in international relations and diplomacy. So please leave your email if you're really interested, and an admissions counselor will contact you to set an information session of half an hour or 15 minutes, and we can discuss where can be your future prospects in IR and diplomacy. And thank you very much for all your questions. These webinars are fantastic just because you are the ones that answer the questions and engage with us. So we will wait to receive the emails. Please write it on the chat, and that's it. And thank you.